fact that there's still such a need for visibility and inclusion in media, because media has such a power to help people to see what is possible. And that is why I'm so thankful for our show and the five of us as hosts and then the individuals we help, because when you see the people, you are all of a sudden saying, this is possible.
Someone call 911 because this is a Fab 5 confidence emergency.
Actually, we shouldn't do that because we should only use 911 responsibly.
Let's start that beauty montage.
Oh my goodness.
When's the last time you cooked?
I had no idea. We killed it.
We did.
Before you get overwhelmed, I have a plan.
I think we're going to love it.
Okay, what do we got? I like my butt rubbed and my Ew.
Pause.
You know those metal bins that you can, like, put clothes in and burn them? Do you have one of those?
Welcome to PaleyFest LA. I'm Patrick Gomez, editor-in-chief of the AV Club, and I'm delighted to be your host for a special PaleyFest conversation honoring Queer Eye. And thank you, of course, to the festival's official card, City, for helping make this event possible. This program is presented by the Paley Center for Media, a nonprofit organization dedicated to honoring excellence in television through education programs, great conversations with the stars and storytellers of critically acclaimed series like the one we're celebrating today, and, of course, the preservation of television's creative legacy through the Paley Archive. To learn more about any of that and to become a member, please visit paleycenter.org. Thank you. Now, for the matter at hand, today we are thrilled to welcome the hosts of Netflix's groundbreaking and Emmy-winning series, Queer Eye. Joining us are Bobby Berk, Karamo Brown, Tan France, Antoni Porowski, and Jonathan Van Ness. Welcome, everyone. Thank you all so much for being part of this. I'm so glad we were able to get together, even if it's not in person. We are living in an interesting time, but your show has been such a beacon of light, even in less dire times. So we appreciate the impact that a show like yours brings and the positivity that it puts out there. And that's needed more than ever right now. So just as a fan, I want to say thank you, but also acknowledge that you all launched a new season, on June 5th, right as the world was in the middle of this pandemic, and this call for national social justice was being just screamed from the rafters for necessary change. I'd love to kind of start off by getting your thoughts on kind of entertainment's place in that move for social justice, and kind of Queer Eye's place in that specifically, because, the show came at a time when people needed a moment of levity, but it's also an important message you all are putting out there.
I'll take that. My reflection to answer the question would be is that I hope now, as we are in the middle of July, that our country is, as far as the pandemic is concerned, I think we're still, actually not even in the peak in a lot of places. And we have seen the lack of leadership and how that's kind of affected that. And then also, I hope that we're still screaming from the rafters for necessary social change. And I hope that is, even though, we're not seeing protests on the scale that we were, I think part of that is also I think that those, whatever, focus on them. I just want to say that I hope that those things are still happening, and I certainly hope that it's not in past tense. And, but for our show to come out in a time when it was certainly both of those things are at the top of everyone's mind, I think our place is to, I think like all of us kind of addressed a little bit, is, we didn't want to be a distraction to the movement, and we hope that our show can serve as a little bit of time for people to not tap out of what's going on, but to kind of self-soothe while leaning into what's going on around us.
I think that our role in entertainment, especially right now, is to amplify those voices and to amplify the movement and to give a voice to some people who might not have a voice because they don't have the platform that we're lucky enough to have. So for me, I think my biggest job right now is to amplify as many voices as you can for visibility to help things change.
And as it pertains to Queer Eye, I think moving forward, I, for one, am certainly very proud of the diversity that we've showcased in the heroes that we bring onto the show, but we definitely can do better. And I think it's important not to rest on our laurels and to continue to tell those stories now more than ever going forward. Whenever we resume filming, whenever that happens, if that happens, just kidding, of course it's going to happen, but you know what I mean.
For this most recent season, we've seen you all in the Philadelphia area, which is much more populated than the rural locations you all were visiting in earlier seasons. Of course, you were in the Atlanta area, Kansas City area, but they were much less populated cities that you were visiting. What were the differences and similarities between the heroes that you were working with in a big city like Philly compared to somewhere in rural Georgia?
I found that being in a bigger city or a city that's a little more liberal than some of the places we've been to before, there wasn't as much of a conversation as to who we are and what we five represent, whereas that seemed to be the case, especially for me when I was having these conversations with people in season 1, season 2. The start of those interactions was, this is who I am. This is what it means to be a person within the LGBTQ community. This is how our interaction should work together, that is equal. And that wasn't necessary in Philly as much, because I think they have a little more exposure to our community. And I think that's often the case with a larger city. They're a little more diverse. And so that was what I will say is the main difference as far as interaction between us and our heroes. But as far as our actual stories go, I don't think it matters where we go within the country. I think we're always going to champion the stories of people who ordinarily don't get to tell their stories, and I think that's what we did beautifully with season 5 of Queer Eye in Philly.
And we definitely got to spend a whole lot more time together in Philly because traffic was so bad we were always in the car together.
As an Angelino, I feel that in my heart of hearts. So I feel you, and I'm glad you had the experience. As hosts of this show, you are, not only hosting in a capacity that we see people host on other programs, but you all are really getting in there and having heart-to-hearts with these heroes. You're creating change in their lives. You're creating change in our lives. And so much of it, at least seemingly, is off the cuff and truly coming from your hearts. How do you all prepare to walk into a situation and begin a journey with these heroes?
I would say that a lot of it is off the cuff, but majority of it is, as you said, as hosts, these are expertise. These are the skills we've been trained in. And so I think sometimes that to an untrained eye, it can seem as if like, there's no real preparation. But there's a lot of forethought that comes into all of our jobs because you're meeting someone where they're at, which can sometimes be a difficult situation when you're asking them to grow exponentially in such a short amount of time. And so for all of us, we have amazing producers who give us some information about the show. But for us as hosts, what I think I'm very proud of us, even after 5 seasons, is that we all take our own time to really think about this hero critically and think about what they need to truly be able to sustain the growth and the things that we're giving to them. It's not just off the whim or off the cuff. It's about like really what is the core of their issue, and then we all talk to each other as friends, but also as hosts to say, this is what I'm doing, this is what you're doing. How do these things work together to impact their life in the most important way? And I think a lot of times you see this done in hosting duos where you see 2 people, but the fact that we have 5 and are able to seamlessly do this together is really proud. I just get really proud of what we're able to accomplish, because you see from 4 days, that's all we have is 4 days to truly help these individuals. By the end of the 4th day, we all look at each other and we're like, we did it again. We did it again. I'm so proud of us, and like in a very humble way, but it's amazing.
It's a collaborative process. Just very quickly, I think that there are a lot of hats to be worn. In one episode, one of the heroes may really touch on something very specific and personal with one of us specifically. So that's where we get into like the history of the hero. Whereas the other ones will then take kind of a different beat and kind of bring a little bit of levity to a scene and offer them, because it is supposed to be a joyful experience for them, as heart opening as this week can be. And while another one of us is going to basically, the responsibility as a host to really drive the story and take the narrative throughout and make sure that we're all on the same page. So it's constant communication. I think it is, I don't want people to mistake the fact that like, yes, a lot of it is a little like the Wild Wild West and we kind of like figure it out a little bit as we go, but there's a lot of communication that happens as soon as we meet the hero and we figure out what the game plan is for the week.
Last year, I got to host in a very traditional way a show where you would see a host who is starting the episode, ending the episode, and shepherds the people that are on that show. This was a competition show through that episode. And that is what is traditionally seen as a hosting job in a host capacity. I will say that even though we don't have to have an inner earpiece, we don't have a script, that doesn't negate the incredibly hard work it takes to act on the fly, to respond without a script, to know that we're going to say something that's hopefully incredibly valuable, that will shepherd us through that episode and create a really impactful episode. And I'm not saying that one is necessarily harder or easier than the other. They are very different, but in my opinion, they are the work that is required on our show comes from us in particular when we're talking about how we take an episode from start to finish, and that is one of the hardest hosting jobs I've ever done.
And I just want to say, I really love Tan's usage of the word shepherding. I really want to use it in my daily vocabulary more.
Please take that, you can have it.
Also, not to be one of those times where like four of us answer the same question, but I think that the last thing that I really think is just, and first of all, that show let us, and Next in Fashion, she's a gorgeous show. We love that show so much. Such a good show. It was trending on Netflix. Anyway, the point is that I love that show so much. But I think the thing that we do that is like from a traditional hosting perspective is that, and that everyone kind of said, but I didn't hear the exact word, is like, what's the most important part of communication, right? It's listening. And even though I talk so much, I think all of us listening and taking the cues of the hero, because we don't meet them until that first day. So we have a little dossier. We know loosely what's going on, but sometimes I have such a vision of like what I'm going to do and like what haircut I would love to see, or Tan has some idea, or some of us, we have some kind of loose idea, and then we meet the person and we're like, oh no, this is not it. Like they need to be with Karamo for 2 days and like I'm going to do a trim, or there's so many things where it's like there is communication, but it's so much listening, because we do, I think truly at the end of the day, we really want to create, like, manage expectations of the hero so that like they do feel like they can thrive, and it's not about these 4 days, and they can continue growing after we've gone. And that requires so much listening and observation from us to the hero and of each other. So I think it's just like, it's listening is so important for our show.
You mentioned listening, Jonathan, and kind of taking cues. You obviously do that so well together. It's even just setting up this call was fantastic to see your banter and dynamic. But what do you all feel like you've learned from each other or about each other's expertise and taken with you for your own lives over the years that you've worked together now?
For me, it's not necessarily the expertise, even though every one of the people on this cast is fantastic at what they do.
I taught you how to do your hair, girl. You did not know how to do your hair.
Shut up.
I didn't know it.
Remember how you said you listen well? Remember how you said you listen? Yeah, I think that the most important thing is the authenticity of what the kids are willing to put out, that our family is willing to put out there. It takes so much bravery, dedication, commitment to what we're trying to do on the show, to speak from the heart and to really share stories. So that is the thing that I'm most encouraged by with our cast, is to share stories, because we know that with the amount we share, that hopefully will help somebody at home watching feel less alone. So yes, I learned so much from every episode with these idiots, but the main thing is that they have taught me to be as open as possible to help as many people as possible.
I have an answer from Tan and Karamo. I think and I'm not there yet, but I've learned like the power of directness and not of like sugarcoating things, and just laying it all out, like, and just seeing what happens. Because there's like really beautiful work that I've seen in both of their scenes that comes from just being blatantly honest. And that goes against my very nature. From Bobby, I think I've learned that it's actually, this is going to sound weird, but it makes a lot of sense to me. It's like, it's okay to actually be a grown-up and to strive for like being organized and having like rituals in life, like that I didn't have before, the life that I have now. And Bobby makes that really attractive in the work that he does with the heroes. And from Jonathan, I think it's a constant reminder that it's like, it's okay to have fun and to have a laugh as well, even in really like emotional, intense, crying scenes, like there's still humor that comes out of like out of that nuance. So yeah.
I love
Beat that, bitches.
What?
Beat that, bitches.
Well, we'll talk about the impact that you've had on the heroes and the impact you've had on yourselves, but I'd love to...
Hold on, before you move on, Antoni has taught us a lot as well. Sorry. Antoni has, for me especially...
Each of you.
Taught me, like, when you're genuine and gentle, I think those are the two words that come together, genuine and gentle, how impactful that can be. Because sometimes you can try to get somebody to go to a space and with genuineness and gentleness, you can really just see them flourish quickly, and that's because that's his true nature.
He also
Cheers, Jonathan.
He also taught you what
Absolutely shredded. So when someone's genuine and gentle, but also shredded at the same time, it's just great. You can just open up like a flower and feel much more comfortable in the situation.
Oh my goodness. Well, I certainly have learned from you all as well, and I'm just one fan. I'd love to hear from you all what's been the most rewarding interaction you had with viewers and what they've told you that they've taken away from the show.
I think for me, it would probably tie back into religion. Everyone knows that's my favorite topic to talk about. But, I've heard from so many people, and especially ministers of churches, who have reached out and have said, my whole life I believed that being gay was a choice. I believed that, gay people were evil and that they chose to be that way. And that's also what I've preached in my church. And I've spread that hate. And after watching your show and seeing the five of you and hearing me in particular talk about how I begged and pleaded and prayed for God every day of my life in my childhood to not make me gay, and I mean, here I am, made them realize that it was not a choice and that I was born that way. And then, if you do believe in God, God made me that way. And since then, they've never preached that hate in their church again. So for little gay kids, not having to have that feeling of self-hate because of what they're hearing in the church, I think for me, it's been the biggest effect. And, in season 1 and 2, I didn't really want to talk about it. It was something that I very specifically said to producers I didn't want to talk about ever. But after seeing the effect that it had, it's something that I'm much more willing to talk about now.
For me, I think one of the most rewarding aspects of interactions from viewers is the experience of hope and acceptance as an experience of watching the show. Like for areas in my life where I've been particularly hopeless and really depressed and down and just like I didn't have hope of like what my future was. And I think without that hope, you really can't have acceptance. And so which I think are two such important things. So whenever someone says to me like, your show gave me hope, it gave me the strength to come out to my family or see some light at the end of the tunnel or sparked an idea that gave me a way to do a thing, always that hope or acceptance piece is and which also I feel like strength is kind of in there too. When people relate to experiencing one of those emotions as a result of watching the show, I'm like, oh my God, that makes like every like mean Twitter comment or like hard thing ever that like happens like worth it. And those things I think happen a lot more than like the dumb Twitter comment I just mentioned. So I think the impact that our show has had, and it constantly causes me to like question reality because I can't even believe that this is like something that I got to do. And I don't know if you all feel the same way, but I think that you do. It's just such an awe-inspiring experience to be able to have that role in people's lives.
Yeah, for me, it's something similar, but having people from the Middle East and South Asia in particular message to say, I don't feel as alone. And I remember that feeling so greatly as a kid because I'd never seen anything like me on TV or in movies. And I just thought, yeah, maybe there's white people that are gay, maybe there's black people that are gay, but we're not allowed to be, that doesn't exist, so there's something wrong with me. And so to know that people, I'm not just talking about kids, I'm talking about grown people also. I get people who are in their 40s and 50s who've lived a life of shame. And I know it's much harder in those Middle Eastern and South Asian countries where that they don't have the same rights as us in the West, as us in the West, and in many places they could be attacked or even punished for it. I do love to hear that they feel like there isn't something wrong with them, and they aren't alone.
I would say one of the biggest impacts for me is that people have now started to focus on their mental health more and be more honest about their mental health. I think that's one of the most beautiful things. We live in a culture where we're often shamed for feeling or for expressing how we feel. You know, you put all these negative stigmas and narratives on you if you say, hey, I'm not feeling okay today, if I'm having anxiety, if I'm feeling sad, if I'm feeling down. You know, everyone is sort of taught that they have to be up and happy and, you know, as if everything is put together. And I think what I love is that we've taught people that to make sure that their mental health is strong, that comes with vulnerability and being able to truly express how you're feeling when you're feeling it and not feel ashamed for expressing that. And then also how it's allowed us, you know, for the fans that watch the show to know that they can create these pockets of safe spaces in their own lives where people can feel safe about expressing their mental health and what's going on. Because I think we're seeing a shift now where it's like, we're never going to go back to not allowing people to talk about their mental health, but we don't tell people to focus on it. And I think it's only going to get better and better with time. And through that, you know, the people who watch our shows and even us, we're getting stronger and feeling better and gaining more tools on how to deal with our mental health. And I think that's a beautiful thing for me, that I constantly hear that from fans of like, thank you for telling me my mental health matters. And that's like a really nice thing.
I think two important things that Karamo touched on, one being mental health. It really does, you know, as someone who's talks endlessly about therapy, and I've been going since I was 17, it never ceases to amaze me. And I still, like, it kind of shocks me that there's still this stigma against against wanting to pursue that, or people feel like some kind of shame or embarrassment in sharing about that. And I think all of us in our different ways have shared that we've been at a point or another in our lives where we have asked for help and that that's okay. And then with also the vulnerability, again, something that I think we all touch on with heroes in different ways, but also, you know, not pretending like we have all of our shit figured out all the time. Like there are certain things that we've all, you know, conflicts that we've grown from and that we've, you know, come out on top, but then there are things that are still ongoing. For me specifically, it's, you know, family dynamics. Like Bobby was mentioning, religion was something he didn't want to talk about. I had a lot of embarrassment and shame growing up because I came from a loving but very dysfunctional family. And that was something that I would constantly compare myself to others. And sharing with heroes, not necessarily telling them how I overcame it because it's an ongoing process, but just sharing that it's like, yeah, it's difficult and it's shit and it sucks, but I'm working through it and I'm okay and I'm going to be okay. And it continues and life goes on. Just hearing people don't necessarily always have to be told how they can get better, but just knowing that there are other people out there in the world who are experiencing that same pain and that they're not terminally unique, I think is incredibly important. It's not having to be the hero all the time, but just sharing the vulnerability and being open and talking about things that are really troubling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, there was a really long lag and I felt like I needed to
I
fill it.
know. I was about to fill it up with like more information, but I don't know what else to say.
Patrick was not happy with any of our answers there. Patrick was like, I'm not with it.
No, just didn't want to speak over any of it because it was all so great. But you know, you're talking about hearing stories like your own and you know, feeling like you're not alone. And a big important part of that is just in general for any young LGBTQ person in particular, but of any minority, is to see themselves represented on screen. The Paley Center actually has a whole section devoted to LGBTQ representation and milestones in entertainment. And, you know, obviously you all are a big part of that, but I'd love to hear from each of you kind of what were some people that you saw and kind of saw yourself in entertainment when you were younger, because you play that role for people now, but clearly you all had that in your lives, or hopefully had that in your lives as well.
Well, I can just say I know Tan and I have talked about this a lot. There weren't a lot for us growing up because most of the figures we had were, you know, white gay men. And so, I mean, I think for me, I think Tan had none. I think for me, it was like, you know, RuPaul was the only one, and even that for me, I respect his craft, but there was something different because I wasn't, you know, doing drag or wasn't, you know, in that type of way performing. So, but I just respected his courage and his honesty, and all the trails that he, you know, had blazed. But other than that, there really wasn't, you know, any other for me, which is why I think it's so impactful that this cast and this iteration is so diverse. I mean, you just look at this, you know, Brady Bunch panel we have going on here, to have a Black man who has Jamaican and Cuban parents, to have, you know, a person who identifies as gender nonconforming. I mean, these are beautiful things. To have Tan being Pakistani. And I mean, this is diversity that we don't often see working well together. But then I'll let it go. Everyone else will answer. But that's, I think Rue is the only one that I had really growing up.
And she's going to come for you for saying that he was your role model when you were a child.
Well, I mean, I was in seventh grade when he had his.
It's like when you and I went to that restaurant that one time, and that kid who was clearly in like his late 20s was like, "Oh my God, I loved you so much when I was a kid," and Karamo was like, "Thank you."
I always think about Rudy Galindo, who was the 1995 U.S. figure skating champion, and he was also the world bronze medalist that year. No, but he was HIV positive. He was open about that. He was out and gay at a time. He was a competitive athlete. At the height of the figure skating, it was like post Tanya, but that was like a really major time for figure skating. And he was out and open about things that people still refuse to be out and open about. He just incredible figure skater, iconic history. And I think another, so I really wanted to be a figure skater. And I just was like, every time he skated, I was just like, oh my God, gorgeous. But that was like a way that his candidness with like with those gorgeous, like little sports vignettes, like before, like, you know, when it's like, and like they tell their story, you know, and there's like the medals.
The Housewives totally stole that.
But I mean, he was so candid and so honest and so fearless. And even figure skating generally is a surprisingly homophobic sport. So I think it's really cool what he did. And another person that I didn't necessarily see myself in, because she's Margaret Cho, and how do I see myself in an Asian woman? The thing that she did that I thought was so important for me as a kid is I loved comedy. I loved stand-up comedy. I loved comedians. And so to see someone who was a proud out bisexual, polyamorous. And she was talking about things that no one else had the courage to talk about as well at the time. And she was breaking boundaries.
Her I'm the One I Want tour was groundbreaking.
Yeah, she's just incredible. And I mean, I may or may not have knocked a copy of Notorious CHO into a bag at Blockbuster because my mom wouldn't let me rent it. And because it was like rated R and it was like 1990, like, and I was like 9 or 10 or something, but whatever, I loved it. I was obsessed. Or actually, maybe I didn't knock it back. I think I maybe told her that it was like a thing of music videos or something. I don't know how I got around it, but
Mary's so gullible. Honestly, really the only gay people I had exposure to growing up were visiting ministers in my church who had been through conversion therapy, and God had helped them to not be gay anymore. So in Middle America, sorry to take it from Margaret Cho to that. But I think that's another reason why it's so important that, you know, we are visible, that we are creating a show that I think attracts a wide range of people, and that is we are able to open the door into homes that normally having gay people on television wouldn't be allowed, you know, but our show teaches love and kindness and acceptance. And so I think some parents who would not be open to allowing their children to watch gay people are more open to our show because it does teach love and acceptance and kindness.
I mean, that is big T trauma, Bobby. I cannot imagine being like a 5 or 6-year-old kid going to church and having like traveling pastors who were like, I mean, when I was like, I talked about that. I think I talked about that in my book. It's like, I went to this one rehab this one time where the first thing that the guy said to me when I went in was like, he was like, do you believe God could deliver you from your homosexuality? And I was like, I have to get Starbucks. I forgot that they are closing. I forgot my shoes are in the car.
And the answer is no.
Like, yeah, I literally, like, I'm like sprinting. I was like, ah! But being like a kid and seeing that, like, that is so traumatizing. No wonder you didn't want to talk about it so much. That is so traumatizing.
I think for me, it's something that I really sought out in films that I watched. And one where it certainly wasn't overt, but I think in Rebel Without a Cause, there was a relationship. The protagonist, James Dean's character, played a heterosexual, but there was this really interesting relationship that he had with young Sal Mineo. And there was like a tenderness and an affection that they both had. But they kind of like touched on it a little bit. And I remember thinking like, oh, I want to see their story. Like, and I remember thinking, I was really young. And I remember thinking like, I wonder what it would, I just assumed in my mind, I was like, oh, they're like on the spectrum of sexuality in terms of how they treated each other. And I was like, I wonder if they didn't have to play these heterosexual characters, like how would they actually be on film? Like, what would that actually look like? And then I'm going to reference two heterosexual actors, but I remember I went to see Brokeback Mountain. It was a movie that I went to see alone, and I was too embarrassed to ask anybody to go see it with me. And that was the first time that I ever saw two men just treat each other with like love when nobody, and behave as though no one was watching. Well, no one was watching except the horses because they were in the woods. But I remember seeing that and just thinking like, imagine what life would be like if that were the case. And one thing I want to touch on that I didn't think I would ever reference, but when Karamo was mentioning RuPaul, I remember RuPaul appeared on Oprah, and I just got home from swim practice, and I was eating these little fried Parmesan squares with like a little pico, and I saw RuPaul, and I was just thinking like, what would it be like if I completely had like just no inhibitions and was able to be like my truest self? And I watched RuPaul do it with such intelligence, and I was just thinking like, holy shit, like that's just unbelievable. And I wasn't ready for it at the time, but I think it sort of planted the seed for, for what was to come. But I remember how impactful that was.
I remember that episode and Oprah commenting on how fit Gru was, and in his tiny little ways, and he looked right at Oprah and goes, honey, pain is beauty.
I don't remember that line, but the rest of it was really impactful.
But when you said Rebel Without a Cause, I thought you were talking, I was like, oh yeah, I know that movie, the one with Tom Cruise and all those other guys, they're playing volleyball with their shirts off in the 80s. I knew I was for sure gay then too. And
then I know it's going to sound dramatic, but I don't remember. Karamo was right. I don't remember a time when I saw a good representation on TV or in movies. Yes, there were Caucasian people, but the Caucasian story is so different to the South Asian story. And yes, they played gay people. I am gay, but you can't remove the South Asian or the Muslim from me and just strip it down to LGBTQ. And so, yeah, I never saw a version of me, and I still don't, other than myself on TV, and that's a really sorry state of affairs.
And if I can just end just on this, is that if you hear about all the references we're making, this is in the last 20, 30 years. This is the individuals we're talking about, like Bobby, was joking, but Rue's not that old. Some of these individuals we're talking about are not that old. And so the fact that there's still such a need for visibility and inclusion in media, because media has such a power to help people to see what is possible. And that is why I'm so thankful for our show and the five of us as hosts, and then the individuals we help. Because when you see the people, you are all of a sudden saying, this is possible. And we're such a small piece of that history. But hopefully what we try to encourage on this and throughout all of our interviews is that there still needs to be more done. I've said this before, and I think everyone on this agrees with me. I hope that, whenever the day comes that our iteration of Queer Eye is done, that another one pops up in another 10 years, like Johnny says, when another Republican gets in office, that another iteration of Queer Eye will pop up. And literally that one will be even more diverse, where you have a trans man, where you have
to a certain extent, I must say, yes, in 10 years, yes, because I know that the world won't change that much in 10 years. However, I hope for a day when we are so redundant that there is no need for us, because at that point we're like, why on earth that so isn't necessary, because those stories are told, those stories are beautiful, those stories are important, and we all understand that. I pray for a day when they can look back on our show and think, why was that even needed? Yeah.
Agreed.
Kenny, you'll never be redundant to me.
Though. But I
Excuse me,
still
Jackie?
want to be on camera. It's so fun. But
Oh, yeah. But just so we don't have to speak just for a community, it would be so nice to just be able to just be.
Yeah.
I just feel like I am, but I run my mouth a lot.
But well, okay, maybe not be, maybe, also be, but maybe never ask the question again about what does it feel like. And actually, that's not to denigrate you in any way. It's just to never be asked the question. Those questions are important right now, but hopefully they won't be necessary in a few more years.
Because I do feel like I'm always going to be curious about, like, how am I going to get the orange out of this highlight? But that's not what we were talking about, you know?
Yeah, no.
Yeah, totally.
100%. I certainly would need to know that. Well, you all are speaking about the long-term future of the potential future Queer Eyes, but I have this next question actually comes from City, which, as you heard me mention, is the official card of PaleyFest. Given how groundbreaking Queer Eye was when it premiered just over 2 years ago, can you all comment how you hope that the show continues to challenge the status quo and inspire social progress now? Like, what do you see for the future for your version of Queer Eye?
Well, we hope to keep pushing out new stories. And I'm going to say this, and what I love about the five of us is that literally during certain episodes, when we walk into someone's house, we go in there wholeheartedly to help that hero. But after we're done, we all collectively will speak to our producers, to the creators of the show, to the network, and say, hey, how about next time we push this story a little bit further? And I'm so glad that we are continuously supported by our executive producers, by the production company, by Netflix, because they hear us and then we see it. You know, like one of the things, and if I hope everyone doesn't mind me mentioning, we've always been like, we love telling these stories of Christian Baptist people, but we've told them now. So why don't we tell someone of the story of someone who's Muslim, tell the story of their experience in this country. And, you know, what I love about what's happening here is that we collectively keep saying, let's push the ball forward, just as hosts, as human beings, as viewers. And I believe that's what we're going to keep getting and keep seeing, because at the end of the day, there's so many stories to be told. And it's beautiful to see, you know, a white guy who's in his 40s or 50s, who's, you know, needs some help. But it's also equally as beautiful to see, you know, the story of like
somebody we haven't seen before.
Anyone
we haven't seen before.
Yeah. You know,
especially with trans stories. I would really love to tell more trans stories, because I think it's really important for, you know, makeover shows have never been for people that were outside of a conventional. And I think that's so important. And I think the expectations that trans people face and gender nonconforming people face are both individually separate. Like, trans expectations are different, gender nonconforming expectations are different, cisgender things are like their own thing. But a lot of those expectations and the cultural norms and ideas around trans stories are really unfair and should be talked about more. The idea that you need to look, you know, more feminine or more masculine to pass as the, and that's like a really big thing that I think that people that watch our show probably don't. And since Skylar, we haven't really gotten to tell any more of those stories. And so I think Black trans folks, I think gender nonconforming folks, Muslim people, I think just have so many beautiful stories. But I will say, I think that the production team, I think, and Netflix, I think, has been I am proud of the diversity that we have shown. But you know, it's like I was on Twitter criticizing Joe Biden's marijuana policy yesterday. Honey, I always think we can go further. I always think we can do more.
I will say, and I know we don't need to defend our casting, because I know we all know they do a wonderful job. I am aware that there are stumbling blocks or hurdles, because there are many communities who probably haven't been highlighted before on camera, especially on a show of the scale, who are concerned about letting people in. Like there are reservations that I would love to go and do, and it's not so much about a makeover, but just to learn their stories and places like reservations or in Muslim communities or deeply religious communities, but they're not always so comfortable with people bringing in camera crews for very valid reasons. Yeah. And so I understand that some stories are very hard to encourage people to tell.
I mean, Patrick, I just want to share some with you. This is from season 4. You know, I just was talking about this before with the other guys, but we had the episode where it was our first interview or hero who was disabled in a wheelchair. And in my field trip, to go to what Tanny's saying about there's communities that are apprehensive about being on camera because they don't want to be exploited, because they want to make sure that the story is told properly. You know, the 2 individuals we helped in my scene, one of the gentlemen had just gotten out of jail. And he was very suspicious of me inviting him to a field trip to meet the man he shot. And literally, as I've talked about this before, like literally 2 minutes before they were supposed to meet, he was like, I'm not doing it because you're not going to sabotage me. You're not going to make me seem like I'm some bad guy. You're not going to make me seem like everyone in my community is bad. You know, and these are the true and honest fears of people outside, because let's be very honest, the media has done an irresponsible job. Hollywood has done a very clumsy job a lot of times of telling the stories of diverse people, you know, and that's why we see stereotypes. That's why we see violence against people of different gender orientations, races. And so I think it's very important to highlight what Tan said about, you know, we want to, for our iteration of this show, is we want to continue to push stories out there, but we also need to make sure that everyone is on board to make sure that it's done responsibly.
There is one of the many reasons we call our heroes heroes. It takes a lot of courage to share the stories that they share.
Yeah. So, you know, I just want to iterate that and highlight what Tan is saying is also, and show a true example of, like, on our show right now, you know, a lot of times you can see a glossed over version of an African-American who has everything fixed. And so, like, to be able to say, like, no, poverty is real, systemic injustices are real, and have those individuals who are coming on our show feel as if we're going to tell those stories responsibly and not damage the African-American community, not damage the legacy of Black folks, is something that's real. I literally had to deal with it in the scene where the guy was like, no. And luckily he had faith in me and my skills as a host, and had faith in our show, that the scene went off beautifully. And we had 2 Black men on an international show talking about violence, gun violence, and talking about healing and forgiveness and closure in a way that I don't believe people have ever truly seen, without there then being some plot twist where now they're bad people again. You know what I mean? Like, look. And so I'm just proud of those stories that we're doing as a cast, and we're going to fight to continuously do those stories responsibly, while also understanding that people have fears.
Well, and as a fan, I have to say thank you for making me feel seen, for telling diverse stories about people of color. It is fascinating to watch you all do what you do and see how much these people trust you. To Karamo's point, you all as hosts bring them into our lives and bring yourselves into their lives, and it's beautiful to watch, and we all appreciate it. I now speak on behalf of everyone, apparently. Well, I want to wrap up by saying thank you for joining us for this special PaleyFest LA conversation with the wonderful hosts of Queer Eye, and thanks to the festival's official card, City. You can learn more about the Paley Center by visiting paleycenter.org. But for now, thank you all, and please take care.